transition into what I have going on for today. Go? Are you telling me to go? Okay, so I this week I've actually thought several times about exactly what I wanted to throw out as maybe a starting topic. Obviously, whatever questions or ideas you might have, start throwing them in the chat feature or the Q&A, because we want to get to your questions. And I don't know how long I'm going to be educational on this topic, but so get those going. But this week I actually had several ideas, and I had even asked one of my groups. I'm like, guys, give me a topic, right? And they gave me a great idea that I'll have to probably cover later, because I've had multiple times this week where I'm actually doing a bit of work to teach empathy skills. And one of the questions that kind of comes up so frequently is, how do I know if a loved one or whoever it might be really comes to me with a concern or an issue or a hurt or some type of pain, and their hurt triggers my hurt? How do I take care of my hurt? How do I let them know about my hurt? And over the years, I've tried to figure out the best way to teach it. It's really not easy to explain, but I'm going to give it my best. And what I've noticed and let me walk through what typically happens. Why I love the monster sock is because all of us have a little bit of monster inside of us, right? So I showed you my socks with this monster, and you pull up the pant leg and you can see the monster in there, right? And really what we typically see from people are claws. And their little claws come out and they scratch us, they hurt us, and somebody's coming towards us. And we have to learn to realize that those claws coming out are claws that are trying to protect themselves or trying to pull you in so that they can get connection. And it takes a bit of work to pull up and to see that there's a little monster in there that really just needs some love and affection, or rather some empathy. And what we typically want to do, though, is when somebody pulls those claws out and they hit us with them, we want to recoil and go, ow, what are you doing? You hurt me too. And now it becomes this, well, let's fight over who hurt who the worst. And if we can determine who hurt who the worst, somehow this is going to resolve. I don't know if that sounds chaotic to you guys, but it absolutely is chaotic. You can't win an argument by trying to argue who's smarter or who hurt who more. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to realize the best move in my practice that I see is, I'm just going to acknowledge the claws. I'm going to acknowledge the hurt. Like, oh, ow, that hurts. What's going on for you? What's happening that you are doing this hurt? But that's really hard when we got hurt. So your move is and this is the way I explain it, and I don't know, we'll just roll with it. But if somebody hurts me with their claws, my move as Matt, whether I'm the therapist or a dad or a spouse, right? My first move is to just kind of breathe. Take a deep breath, kind of just try and gain some understanding. And I'm trying to slow down all my reactions. Because if somebody's claws come out and they hit me, my instinct is to defend myself, is to lash back out. And I'm trying to slow down enough that I can figure out what my response needs to be. Now, my next move is often to say, okay, hold on. So I'm pausing, I'm breathing, I'm realizing my shame has come up. Maybe my kid said something to me and I suddenly feel shame because I'm like, oh, I'm such a bad father. My kid wouldn't say that if I wasn't a terrible father, and they know the truth. And I'll take that and stick it into a big old jar. I imagine a mason jar, right? Just a big, thick, heavy glass jar. I close the lid on it tight. I stick it over to the side. I'm doing all of this mentally and emotionally. Then I'm leaning into my kid or whoever it is and saying, hey, what's going on? Obviously you're hurt or you're frustrated or you're trying to share something with me. What is it you're trying to share? Because I think I'm confused. I think I'm not understanding. And until they explain it enough, only then am I going to respond, oh, wow, it really sounds like you're frustrated. It sounds like you're hurt. And I'm sorry you're having to go through that. And so I'm trying to get the perspective taking of empathy before I make any sort of comment. I'm going to ask as many questions as I can, get the perspective before I respond compassionately, if that makes sense. So now I think that's as far as I'm going to go on that teaching piece, other than the question that gets handed to me multiple times this week was, well, when can I share mine? When can I bust out my mason jar full of hurt? And the response that I have to that is, if the person coming to you is being vulnerable and sharing their pain, now you might think, well, they're not being vulnerable, they're just being a jerk. And that could be true. But think about it. Them being a jerk is filled with all sorts of vulnerability. So you have to lean into the jerky vulnerability and pull that out of them by, hey, I'm confused, I don't understand. Are you trying to hurt me right now? What's going on? Pull that out, then show empathy. Then once you reach a moment of connection, you can say, hey, it seems like you got your need met. It feels to me like you feel heard and understood. Is now a good time? Can I share with you some of the hurt that came up for me? And then I can unpack my mason jar. Now, there's times where if the conversation's heavy enough and deep enough, I'm not going to bust out my mason jar just yet. I might come the next day. I might come 2 days later. I might come a week later. But what I see from people who struggle with addiction is that the only time they bring out their vulnerability is when they've been lashed out on. Right? And they think, oh, we're in an argument. Well, I might as well bring out every jar I've got and start chucking them. And I have to say, hey, you can't do that. That's what we call turning the tables, right? And you're now possibly trying to distract from your loved one's hurt and pain by throwing all your hurt and pain. So you've got to work on connection and empathy. And then when things are calm and connected, then you bring up your hurt and pain with your loved one. And people who struggle with addiction are like, why would I do that? I'm going to start a fight out of nowhere, right? I'm going to create discomfort out of nowhere. And I always laugh and I'm like, well, part of the reason you struggle with addiction is because you can't sit with discomfort. And the only time you're bringing forward your pain is when somebody else brings up theirs. Well, that's not fair. That's not going to work ever. And then partners of people who struggle with addiction will often tell me, because they end up finally getting vulnerability, and they'll come back to me and they'll say, when is he or she ever going to acknowledge my pain? Because anytime I bring up my pain, it becomes about them, and then I'm giving them empathy, and it never comes back to me. Vicious, ugly cycle. We're not going to cover it all today, but hopefully that gives you guys something fun to think about, maybe ask questions. And I know, Scott, you probably have questions ready for me right now.
I do. You kind of addressed it, but and by the way, just put your questions in the Q&A feature or the chat feature, but preferably Q&A. You said wait until it's calm and everybody's collected and then bring up your pain. And I'm thinking that's going to be really, really hard to do, to break into this, like, finally the sea is peaceful and now I'm going to do a cannonball off the side of the boat. Why would I do that? Is that crazy? And whether you're the addict or the betrayed partner, it's like, you've had all this chaos and suddenly you've got a peaceful moment and you're telling me to bring up some hurt now? Really?
Right. But, and that's the piece that, when I'm working, it typically is somebody who's struggling with addiction that is avoiding, right? And they want to avoid all discomfort and all emotion. And that's why they've become prone to addiction throughout their life. I shouldn't say why, but that's a trait perhaps, right? And so you're right. Like it does. It feels absolutely crazy. But so much of the work I do when I'm working with somebody struggling with addiction is you have all these hurts and pains. They're legitimate hurts and pains. Sometimes I'll have somebody struggling with addiction who says to me, I've been the one who's done all the hurt. I'm not allowed to have any hurt and pain. And I think, you're crazy. You've got so, well, I don't say that, by the way, but I do think, no, of course you have hurt and pain. You've been covering up hurt and pain your whole life, potentially, with an addiction. You need to start bringing that forward to people who can start to sit in that hurt and pain with you. That's part of the healing process. So yes, it feels super chaotic, and it does feel like you're doing a cannonball into a calm sea. But that's where the healing occurs, that I'm now coming to you and saying, hey, I know I've struggled to feel like anybody can be here for me, and I'm going to give you a small hurt and pain. And would you be willing to like maybe just acknowledge that it's there so that I can feel a little better? It's terrifying.
Yeah. And that was actually the next question I was going to bring up is, I talked to so many guys and they're like, no, I think I just need to sit here and take it and be the punching bag. And, it's like, first of all, not a good analogy. And second of all, you need to hear your betrayed partner out and find some understanding and some empathy. But that doesn't mean you don't get to have your own feelings. And sometimes, as you said, right in the heat of the moment may not be the best time to bring them up. Maybe just focus on what your partner just brought up and, call me instead and gripe to me. And then when the timing is better, then you can go back and say, when you came at me like this, I felt this way and it really hurt me. And, when this happened, I felt this, the standard. Can you walk through that little standard, how to communicate something like that, the phrasing for it?
And you're talking about like, so if
when you did this, I felt this, that way.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is, if we can talk about what happened, talk about like the cycle of what happened. So if instead of saying, you really hurt me yesterday, right? What I would say is, yesterday when you came and started telling me about your hurt. So again, I'm talking about it's like I'm describing, instead of saying, I'm trying to think of a good way of explaining it. People, to be honest with you, people really struggle with this when I try and teach it to them, because we want to jump in with the hurt. And I'm trying to say, no, talk about the steps of how the hurt happened, right? So instead of yesterday you were flying a plane, it was yesterday you walked over, you got into the plane, you revved up the engine, right? You're talking about all the processes, all the steps. So you came to me yesterday and you shared with me your hurt, right? This is how I'm seeing it all happen. When you did that, now I'm owning it, right? I heard you share your hurt, but what I heard was that you think I am a worthless person, right? What I heard you tell me was that I'm worthless, or that I'm rude, or that I'm mean. Is that the message you were trying to send me? Right? Because I'm having a hard time hearing anything else. And so now I'm giving it back to them to say, can you share with me what was going on, how you were thinking about it? Is that walking it through properly the way you were asking?
Yeah, I think so. There's that whole process where it kind of it stops you from blaming them. And it's just, when this happened, this is what was going on in my head.
Right. So I'm
is that what you wanted to go on in my head or not?
Right. And most of the time what we want to say to people is, yesterday you did this.
Yeah.
and I'm going to tell you that this is what you did and you meant to do it.
Yeah.
Instead of yesterday, this happened, and here's how I interpreted it. And I'm wanting to ask you if that's what you meant by it. Now, sometimes, oh, we just got a really good question on this.
Okay. All right. You want to go to the questions?
Only, no. Well, it's the second question that's popped up.
Yeah. Does that give the person a chance to bail out of what they really meant? That's a great question about
Oh, and people ask that all the time, right? Because if you notice in that question alone, you're sharing your fear, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing to share. I'm because if this person who asked that question were able to go to their partner and say, "Hey, I want to ask you a question about what happened yesterday, but I'm really nervous that you're going to tell me what you think I want to hear, instead of telling me what you actually meant." And so I want to ask you a question, but I'm wondering if you would be willing to tell me what you really meant, even if it hurts me. Right? So I love that question, because that's what we're trying to get out of our partner, is their authenticness, right? Yes, I was trying to tell you that you're mean and that you're a jerk. In that moment, my response, and the response I'm trying to teach you guys to learn, is, why would you try and tell me I'm a jerk? Right? Like, what's going on there that you felt you needed to tell me that I'm a jerk? Right? So no matter what their response is, you can flip it to basically pull more authenticity out of the person. Yeah, and when I say flip it, I'm not talking in a negative way.
Yeah, and addicts, we don't want to have any controversy or confrontation. We just want to skate along, on smooth seas and do what we do behind the scenes without you questioning or knowing. And then, we don't want you to get mad at us when you find out, but when you do, we don't want to perpetuate that, or we're just afraid of the vulnerability part, because we don't have any control over your or my vulnerability. It's scary. And, the question, does that give the person a chance to bail out? For an addict, yeah, an addict's going to take that opportunity to bail out 9 times out of 10. So I love what you said about, even if it hurts me, please tell me the truth, because then it really puts the onus on the other person to not bail out. Because bailing out is not very healthy. It's old behavior, bailing out.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to put it out there, and sometimes you're putting it out there and it may perpetuate a lie. But as you continue to do this over and over, you will get more and more authenticity, not only from yourself, but from the partner who has the addiction, right? And that is what creates the trust in the relationship. So the problem is, if you don't ask these questions, if you don't give a person the opportunity to lie, you're not giving them an opportunity to tell the truth either. Right? And so sometimes you're doing these things not because you expect the pattern to change, or that they're going to do it perfectly or show up the right way. Sometimes you're doing it because you're getting that flow going, and you're changing the routine in the relationship. And so I know I'm going to ask this question and you're going to lie to me, but I want to start asking these questions, because hopefully soon in your recovery, you won't need to lie to me anymore. Right? If we operate from a place of, I'm never going to ask the question because I'm afraid of the lie, or I'm afraid that they're not gonna, that they're gonna bail out, well, then we're frozen in our fear and we're not even giving the opportunity for progression. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it really does. Let's jump into the question here. First question we got is, what if the addict stays in their own hurt His hurt is the most important thing 99% of the time. And then there's some more of this below. It says, let me say this another way. His so-called hurt shows up when he's lying his ass off and acts as if he's being hurt. 18 months since D-Day, and he just confessed another lie a couple of days ago. He says, I'm mean because I always ask the same question, and he gets so offended when I say I don't believe him. I am beyond irritated. Okay, so the addict is, you know.
Well, let me start with the first question,
Okay.
and then maybe dive back. But you say, what if the addict stays in their own hurt? Well, this is going to sound rough, but the truth is, somebody struggling with addiction is in their hurt and is the most important thing 99% of the time, right? Like the addiction has developed, and I say 99% because I'm quoting what your question stated, but the addiction had developed as a coping strategy to ease pain, and they've never learned a healthy way to ease that pain. And so pain tolerance or pain reduction is their survival, is their mode of survival all the time. And so if you've ever sat in the relationship feeling like, wow, this is always about them, it's because that's what life has developed for them, right? That is true. And so, of course, as a partner, you are so irritated, so frustrated, because not only do they have to figure out how to work through the addiction and gain pain tolerance, but they also need to learn these skills that are fairly important called empathy skills, where they can start showing up for you in your pain. And it's like almost like a second betrayal as a partner, because you're sitting there going, okay, now I'm here and I'm working with you on your addiction, and I'm in it. We're going to work. We're going to figure this out. Like, go team. And I'm showing up and tending to your wounds. And when are you ever going to show up for mine? And that process, unfortunately, feels like it takes forever. For some people, it may never come, as far as their pain not being the center of their world. But so I want to validate that, yeah, it absolutely feels that way. Hopefully that kind of answers it a little bit. And then I was going to see on the second question, he says you're mean because you always ask the same questions. And I would totally lean into that. Really, tell me more about mean. Tell me more about what feels mean to you. Because I think you telling me that I'm mean is helping me understand how you see the world, right? Why do you think I'm asking these questions? Do you think I'm trying to catch you? Do you think I'm trying to get you in trouble? Like, what is your interpretation of me asking these questions? I'm trying to inflict pain on you? How do you see the world? And so I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if there's been a disclosure or not here. It sounds like maybe not.
No, it says 18 months since D-Day. Well, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean disclosure.
Discovery.
Yeah, discovery.
Yeah. An initial, like, finding out, usually, rather than formal therapeutic disclosure of everything.
No, that's a great question.
Because usually, you know, after the formal therapeutic disclosure, that repeated questioning kind of lessens a bit, doesn't it?
And if you keep catching somebody in a lie, you're not going to believe them. Like, that's just how it works, right? And so he could get offended, and that's disappointing. And he's got to learn to process that with some buddies. I wouldn't, if you keep catching a person in a lie, I'm not going to believe him either.
And I just kind of want to add that addicts, and I'll speak because I'm an addict in recovery. We're very childish in a lot of ways. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of being chastised. We're afraid of we would rather lie to you than admit fault, because if we admit fault, you might reject us and leave us. So we'll get super defensive, and we'll lie our asses off, as you say he's doing, and act as if we're the victim. No, mommy, I didn't eat that cookie. Why would you accuse me just because I have chocolate all over my face?
But God, I love how you say that, because what we learn to do is to lean in and say, hey, are you lying because you're afraid I'm going to leave you? Right? Are you lying because you're afraid that I'm going to see who you really are and that I'm going to reject you? Um, that's what I would lean into, right? Because that's where you're going to get vulnerability and emotion. Now, keep in mind his response. No, his response might be like super defensive. No, that's not what's happening. And sometimes I'll throw out a question just to start spinning the wheels, right? It might be 2-3 days later, a week later, a month later. Hey, do you remember when you asked me that? Well, it's probably true. And so sometimes we're asking questions not because we believe that they can actually answer the question or that they're going to tell us the truth, but because we're trying to get those wheels spinning. And if we can get those wheels spinning, maybe they can work through something and ultimately come forward with honesty at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you point that out, because, the example I gave with the little kid, stealing a cookie, usually the next day they'll admit that, yes, I ate the cookie, but they're not going to do it in the moment because it's just not human nature for somebody in that narcissistic defensive state.
Yeah, it's too dangerous.
Yeah. So, okay, what about trying to do this with someone who does a lot of gaslighting? You might want to explain what gaslighting is. It seems they would turn it on me by saying that it's all in my mind. Well, that's gaslighting. There you go.
Yeah, gaslighting is essentially where we try to bring up a concern to somebody else, and they basically turn it around and tell us we're crazy, or they don't know what we're talking about, and it gives us that feeling of like, well, am I the only one seeing this? Am I crazy? I guess the hard part about the question is, what about doing this? And I'm trying to figure out exactly doing what with somebody who does a lot of gaslighting.
Sharing my hurt with you when they're going to gaslight, when they're going to flip it on you, basically.
Yeah. So the struggle is, I would say that there's a couple of things I would encourage someone to do if there's a lot of gaslighting. One, you want to really work on self-compassion with, like, I was going to say self-compassion with yourself, and that's kind of repetitive, but work on self-compassion, because if I'm going into and try to be vulnerable and I'm saying to my partner that, hey, I have something I want to share and I'm really, well, I would try slicing it thinner first. Hey, I have something I want to share, but I'm really nervous that you might tell me that it's all in my head, right? I'm really nervous that you might tell me that I shouldn't feel this way, right? So that's that slicing it thinner piece that I would take that in, and I would ask, I might just straight up ask, I'm wondering if you could try and show me some empathy, whether or not you agree with how I'm seeing things. So I would try and hand them on a silver platter the here's exactly what I need from you. Can you empathize? Can you tell me that I'm valid for having these thoughts, even if you don't agree with why I'm having these thoughts? That's probably how I would start out. But then on the self-compassion piece, if I go in going, you know what, I'm going to share my concern, and the truth is that I'm valid, that I know that it's okay for me to feel this way, I'm not crazy, whether my partner can see it or not, this is true and this is right. So then I go in and I share it and they gaslight me, and I'm like, okay, well, all right, I thought I'd share, and I'm good for now. And then I'm walking away going, okay, it's okay. I had a voice. I was able to share that, whether or not my partner could show up. I'm just grateful I'm able to have a voice. I used to not be able to do that, right? So there's a couple of techniques that could help.
Yeah, I always pictured gaslighting as kind of using my denial and defensiveness as a weapon to put it onto you, like blame you for all of my behavior, and cause you to question your own reality. And for victims of gaslighting, if you are questioning your own reality because you've been lied to so much that you don't even know what the truth is anymore, please reach out to your therapist and your girlfriends or guy friends, and your support group, if you're in a 12-step, and get a reality check. He says this, but my gut is telling me this. Usually your gut's going to be right, first of all. But people have been gaslighted. You have to learn to trust your own perception of reality again. And sometimes you need, people who are not gaslighting you to confirm your truth, so that you can step forward with that voice that Matt is talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's one of the things that I push a lot, especially for betrayed partners. The reality of it is this actually is really important for addicts as well, but you really need to trust your instinct. Your instinct is really, really valuable. Trust your intuition. It's done a lot of good. You knew there were problems. You knew things weren't quite right. And so now that you are aware, you want to learn to praise your instinct, that inner voice that was telling you. And yeah, absolutely. Reach out to your support group, tell them about your fears and concerns, and and try and get that support, so that, because you're going to take a hit anytime the gaslighting comes up, you want to go get refilled. I think you're right on, Scott.
Yeah. I also wanted to make note of the fact that when we're seeking empathy, and you just said this a moment ago, when we're seeking empathy, and we can go and we can lay it out, we may not get that empathy. So can you kind of reiterate what to do when we don't get that response that we're hoping for, when we don't get our need met?
Yeah. Well, my push to everybody is that our core needs are non-negotiable, right? And so there is no such thing as being needless or wantless, right? Our core needs are non-negotiable. We need water, we need air, we need love, we need affection, right? We have lots of needs. I can't name them all by any stretch right now, right? And so if I know that I'm going into a vulnerable situation and I'm asking somebody to show up for me, and the truth is, if you are being vulnerable with your partner in any way, right, you could be vulnerable by asking them to take the trash out, right? And that may sound ridiculous, but the truth is, I need some support, I need some help. Can you take the trash out? And they can have a totally awful response. And we go, oh, and it hits that core belief for us that, man, I can't trust anyone to show up for me. If you know you're going into a vulnerable situation and you're going to ask for empathy, then in the back of my mind, I also know, I know the first person I'm going to call right now to get some empathy from them, right? I've got it already planned out. I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to go for a walk. As soon as rejection hits, I'm going to take care of me and have friends on speed dial, even though it's not really a thing anymore, to have friends on speed dial ready to go, because I don't want the rejection to pull that much of a deficit and put me in a worse place. So did that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I just wanted to really reiterate that point, because we're encouraging people to go into a vulnerable situation, and it's not always going to work out. So the backup plan is key.
Yeah, and I mean, think about it. Think about when you come up with, if you know you're going to go and be vulnerable, then you're thinking of several things in your head. Who can I reach out to? What would be good for me right now? Right? There's times where I'm like, man, I know tomorrow is going to be rough. And so afterwards, after this thing is over, I'm going for a bike ride. Well, that's just me because I love biking. But it's like, I'm going to go for a bike ride, right? So I have something ready to go. I've got an exit strategy to go take care of myself. And that's critical. And that could be, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go for a bike ride. I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to do some meditation. And I've got it ready to go on my phone, right? Like whatever it is. And I've got several things I'm going to try. Too often, I think we go into vulnerable situations hoping for the best, but having no exit strategy, no plan for how I'm going to take care of myself. And now we've got this gaping wound. I mean, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm going to I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm going to go do this dangerous thing that I can't come up with a good example for. I'm going to go for a bike ride and not have a phone with me in case I get in a car or in case I get in a wreck and I can call 911, right? Or I'm going to go for a bike ride and not have a helmet, right? Like you.
Matt lives dangerously.
I almost always wear a helmet, almost always. But it's anything we do, we have backup plans. Most of us aren't driving around a car without a spare tire that's ready to go, if that makes sense. So you have a plan, you have a cell phone, you have an idea of what you're going to do in case tragedy were to strike. But yet some of the most vulnerable experiences that we have with people we love and care about, we don't go in it thinking about a backup strategy, right? We just go in it hoping for the best. And I hate to say it, that doesn't work very well. So have a plan, have a strategy. And if you don't even know what that looks like, start talking to your 12-step group, start talking to your counselor, start talking to, friends, family, whoever you can, and developing these strategies to keep yourself balanced.
Yeah, thank you. I love this next question. This is from a trade partner whose husband is the addict and never talks about his own hurt. Instead, he just sweeps it under the rug. Our conversations revolve by his choice around the pain he has caused me and his disappointment and confusion about himself. Is this okay? Great question. Because I think it happens a lot.
Oh, this is a phenomenal question, right? And I don't have a name for it, but like in my head, this is almost so quite possibly what's happening here. Like the first thing that popped into my head is this could be somebody who's so full of shame that constantly makes it about like all of the hurt and pain and whatever that they've caused somebody else as a way of distracting and staying out of their own stuff, right? That's what it sounds like as I read this. And what I would probably recommend you do in a situation like this is to go to the person and say, hey, here's what I've noticed. It seems like anytime I try to bring up your hurt and pain, anytime I try to bring up your wounds, it gets flipped and we start talking about how you've hurt me, and I might say to the person, I appreciate that you're trying to care for me. I appreciate how maybe humble you are or how much you recognize that I'm hurting. But the truth is, a healthy relationship is where we can start showing up for each other in our pain and in our hurt. And so I'm wondering, are you avoiding your hurt and pain by coming and talking about mine? Or is it too painful to talk about your pain? Like, what is going on when your pain comes up that you want to switch over? Do you feel like you don't have permission to talk about your pain? Because if you bring up your pain, it somehow is minimizing my pain, right? I would try and explore some of those questions.
Yeah, it's possible he's been told, you're the perpetrator and you need to be there for her pain, and he's taking that to an extreme. Or as Matt said, he could just be kind of hiding from his own shame and his own feelings and his own pain.
Yeah, sometimes early in recovery, I've told guys and gals, like, if you have been the one doing the major injury, right? If you're struggling with an addiction and you've caused a major injury, like, you really need to lock it down and just focus on, you're right, I've hurt you, I'm starting to see that now, I'm really sorry, right? Like, it's almost like get into this robotic place and practice staying in your partner's pain. And so it could be a case of where he's kind of like learned that, and then that's become, no, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to do. And so Scott, you might be right on there. And it's like, okay, now I'm ready. I see that you can show up for me in my pain. Now I'm ready. Can you let me show up in yours?
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful thing for a betrayed partner to do. I love that you're asking this question because it shows you do want to show up for him the way that he's at least trying to show up for you. And I think that's a real sign of relationship progression and some healing has taken place. But yeah, for more healing, there is a next step, and that involves him, sharing with you what he's going through. And he may be doing that, with his sponsor or his therapist, but just kind of hiding it from you, or maybe not, which is worrisome. Yeah. So this is a follow-up from the addict who stays in his own hurt 99% of the time. So how many counselors, books, videos does it take? We're on our third counselor, numerous books and videos. He's never been completely honest with any of his counselors either, and no, there has been no formal disclosure. So how can this couple jumpstart from a really stuck place here?
Yeah, and you know what? It's hard. How many counselors, how many books, how many videos does it take? I mean, that's the hardest thing. I mean, obviously you've done several. You're already on your third counselor. I can't imagine how many books you guys have read, you know, how many videos you've watched. So if he's never been, if you have the feeling that he's never been completely honest, I think that that's probably where I would go. And what I mean by that is, so I would encourage you to find well, I don't think you've actually told me what kind of addiction, but I would find a counselor who's trained in addiction, which my hope is that's what you're already working with, who knows how to do a full disclosure. And one of the things that I might ask, well, if I were you, I would say I want a full disclosure properly prepared by two counselors who know how to prepare both people for a disclosure. And I would like a follow-up with a polygraph and have regular polygraphs, whether it's whether it's quarterly or every 4 months or every 6 months, whatever it is, so that I can have some tool that could help me measure honesty. Now, like I've said before, if you've listened to my videos, I don't think polygraphs are the end-all be-all, but I think they can be a very helpful tool. But I would start with disclosure. If you haven't had a full disclosure, sometimes there's some things buried in disclosure that are fostering shame, and that shame, because it hasn't fully come out, will perpetuate the lying. So one of the things I work on early, and I think I don't know how much, I can't remember how much Tammy and I covered it in the last video, the one that we did 2 weeks ago. But we talked a little bit about disclosures, and I think it's important to start that process first thing. And so if I have somebody come in or a betrayed partner come in, I'm trying to get that done within 3-6 months, obviously working whatever pace we have to, but I think it's really important to do a full disclosure. That way lying, if we can get it all out, lying can become less frequent because we've already done the full disclosure, and then we have a polygraph kind of backing that up. So that's really where I would tell you to go, but there's no way to answer your question on how many counselors, how many books. There are times where I will encourage inpatient. If this continues to go on and really isn't getting better and the lying continues to happen, then we need to step it up a notch. Tammy and I talked about that in the last session too. We may need to push inpatient and say, I'm not sure I can stay in this relationship if you aren't willing to consider inpatient. Now, I wouldn't say that unless that's true, right? As a partner, you don't want to say things to try and manipulate the person. If you can stay in this relationship, whether they continue to lie or not, then I don't know that I would say that either. I'll be here whether you lie to me or not, but I would definitely, I would not push inpatient. I would not push certain things unless that's truly where you are. So be honest with yourself and your addicted spouse. So you're muted, Scott.
Yeah, sorry, I was typing into the chat feature for everybody. But my initial thought, so I muted myself because apparently I'm a loud typer. So I've been told. Yeah, my initial thought was after 18 months and 3 counselors, it's probably time to think about residential. Residential treatment, inpatient treatment, it's not all about breaking through denial and getting honest, but that tends to be the first major task, is just getting, the addict to just get honest with himself about what's really going on. And then, then there's a starting point, because, until an addict gets totally honest, the first step in 12-step recovery is admitted to ourselves, or no, that's later. But anyway, we admit that our life we're powerless over our addiction and our life is unmanageable. I totally screwed up the first step. But, we have to get honest with ourselves, basically, is the first step. And until we do that, we're not likely to make any real changes. So yeah, he's got to get honest. That's my addict lecturing.
Yeah. And sometimes getting them to be honest is really, really difficult. I mean, it is such a painful process. There's time. I mean, the number of times that I've had somebody where it's like, oh, finally you're coming out with something, or, oh, you had to get caught again. Right. And then I'm pushing, saying, hey, we got an issue here. I've told many clients, I'm not sure I can keep working with you because you're not being honest with me. So I require a polygraph for you to work with me. And they're like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, you can find another therapist if you'd like. But in order to keep working with me, I have to have some idea that you're going to be honest with me. And so I've required it as a therapist because I've had so many times where lying has occurred.
And just to confirm what Matt says, it was my third therapist that I finally started telling the truth to. The first two didn't help me, and I blamed them, but they didn't help me because I never told them the truth.
Exactly.
Never told them what was going on.
Oh, it's fascinating how many times.
Like crazy.
Yeah, the number of people who will say, "Oh, my therapist wasn't helpful," and yeah. Are there therapists out there who maybe aren't so helpful? Sure, but guess what? If you aren't, it's that whole concept: garbage in, garbage out. Like, I'm going to only be able to put out what you give me, and that's what I have to work with.
Yeah.
All right.
Next one here. The addict is really laid back. Nothing phases him. He's very successful and logical. His parents got a divorce, but what I'm going to do about it? It happened when we were grown. Yeah, it sucks, but what's the point to dwell on it? Or I have cancer, but it's treatable. Best kind of cancer if you get cancer. No chemo needed. I don't even consider myself a cancer survivor. So that's how laid back he is. Is it possible that this is a well-adjusted, half-full personality trait, or is it a contributing factor to the addiction?
Oh gosh. If somebody's response every time we go somewhere difficult is to give me something like, oh yeah, it happened when I was little, it sucks, but why dwell on it? Or, man, honestly, I've had the best type of cancer, so I don't even consider myself a cancer survivor. If somebody's giving me that kind of response all the time, a thing that I'll often do is, hey, I'll be honest, some of this stuff's kind of big. I mean, your parents getting divorced, divorce from parents is one of 10 childhood traumas, right? That can be a really big deal. Is it, and I might ask them, is it possible that you're trying to put a silver lining or a toxic positivity on it? Or, I don't know that I would say that way, but is it possible that you're trying to go positive as a way of avoiding some of the hurts and pains that you've had? Right? Like, I'm just going to hit that, me personally, I hit that right out of the gate. Like, hey, here's what I've noticed. You have these patterns and you're very positive, but is that ever happening because you're avoiding? Well, to answer your question, is that a well-adjusted half-full personality trait? Only if you're seeing them get into emotion at other times. Only if I'm in a public setting and somebody's like, hey, your parents got divorced, and I'm like, yeah, right? If I'm in a space where I'm not going to share, I'm not going to share with people these deep wounds. But if my spouse asks me a question and I'm constantly silver lining it all the time, hey, I would need to say, that's a really good question. I'm honestly not in a really good place to talk about that right now. Can we come back to that? Right? Then rather than avoiding, I'm just telling her, here's my need, if that makes sense. So I have a hard time believing that it's a well-adjusted half-full personality trait unless they're showing that they can get into the emotion other places. Is it a contributing factor to his addiction? Sure. I think there's plenty of people who don't have an addiction who struggle with the same thing. It often comes from, I think, people earlier in our lives who were, hey, look on the bright side, hey, half glass full. That didn't make sense.
Glass half
Glass is
full.
half full, right? And so then we learn, oh, in order to cope with emotion, I need to use positivity instead of feeling sadness. In order to cope with emotion, I need to use positivity. I need to silver lining everything. Somebody's always got it worse than me, right? That's what I would maybe start to explore. Hey, did you learn growing up that you weren't allowed to have emotions and you had to always look for somebody else who has it worse than you? Did you get taught that? That's most likely what it is, would be my guess. Not necessarily that it's a contributing factor to the addiction. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, there's a big difference between being grateful for what you have in life and avoiding the reality of life.
Yeah.
Addicts, we don't get drunk or chase porn or whatever because we're looking to have a good time. We do it because we want to feel less. We want to damp our feelings down.
Or
And
feel differently.
this Pollyannaism is just another way of damping down, repressing emotions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it could be very related. Thanks, Matt. I have a huge gaping wound from an incident today. My addict husband baited me to feel shame for his addiction and then said, I don't resent you for the fact that I can't act out. I blew up and have felt in a daze all day. Yeah, I can understand that. I don't resent you for the fact that I can't act out.
Yeah. And so, man, if you're coming into this with a huge gaping wound, honestly, I'm going to encourage you, just sit and breathe and just get yourself present and oriented to where you're at right now, and look around and ask yourself, like, hey, am I safe right now? Am I in a space where, honestly, for you to share this with us, I think is awesome, because I almost hear you saying, hey, I'm kind of hurt. Can you show up for me? And the truth is, I'm doing my best right now, and I'm grateful that you were vulnerable enough to share this. And it really does sound odd and painful that he would say that to you. Obviously, he's got something going on, some type of pain happening for him. And I would encourage you to, some of the things we talked about earlier, think about who you could reach out to, who you could have a compassionate phone call with, because that daze, that haziness could be like a limbic response, the hangover of a limbic response. So the limbic response is our survival mechanism. We feel frozen. It sounds like you blew up. Let's see. You blew up. That's what you said. And so you have this anger outburst, but it might be more on the rage side because you're hurting, which makes sense. And so that daze or that haze that you're feeling is you having to come back and get grounded and get yourself in a good place. You might even feel a little bit of shame about the way you acted. I don't know. And I just want you to know your pain is real. You have every right to feel that rage. You have every right to feel that hurt, because it really sounds like he was pretty insensitive. So I'm really sorry. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to add, I really feel the pain of that. I'm with you. Yeah, I can't imagine how that. Yeah, I'm struggling for words, which is rare.
Yeah.
What can she do in a day or two to express this pain and maybe get some empathy, since that's what we've been talking about today?
No, that's a great question. I mean, another thing I'll tell you is to get out of that daze, sometimes it's, like I said, going for a walk, getting body movement happening can be very helpful. And as far as, in a day or so, whenever you feel like you can, you might come back and say, hey, I'm not sure what you were trying to share with me. And I actually would like to hear your vulnerability around that, if there's some way for you to share with me, maybe your deeper, softer emotion that may be going on under there. Um, I mean, honestly, if he said, I don't resent you for the fact that I can't act out, um,
I mean, what I would hear is, I do resent you for the, I mean, that's what I would be
well,
hearing.
yeah, I'm super curious about like how he came, because the truth is he could have had this like aha moment working with his therapist, and he's bringing to you, bringing to this person um hey, I mean, it doesn't sound like it came out that way, but like he could be trying to explain. It's he, right? Yeah, the husband. So he could be trying to explain that, like, hey, I don't resent you anymore. And that would be like, because I've seen you like my mom, or I've seen you like my dad, and like you were the authority figure, and I don't feel that anymore. And I mean, I have no idea what was happening there. If so, he didn't probably present it, obviously, in a way that worked for you. And so coming back to it and saying, hey, can you share that with me? Or don't go there and go straight to first, hey, I need to share with you the shame that came up for me. And I want you to consider, you said he baited me to feel. And there's a lot of judgment there that was something he was trying to do, and he might have, right? I have no idea what the truth is there, but I think I would try and approach it and say, hey, when you came to me and you shared with me that you don't resent me for the fact that you can't act out, that really felt painful to me because, and then you're going to want to try and share that, because um, it felt like you were turning the tables on me and telling me it was my fault you couldn't act out, or you were telling me that like it was my fault that you've had this addiction, right? Whatever's happening there for you. And then I might ask, is that what you were trying to tell me? Is that the message you were trying to send? Then see what kind of a follow-up you get. No, I wasn't, but I could totally see why you'd feel that way. Right? Or, you know what? I think I probably was trying to send that. That really wasn't the best way for me to tell you that. Right? Hopefully, he'll give you some type of an answer that would be a little bit more vulnerable than what was happening.
Yeah, and Matt and I can sit here and make up stories about his motivations and what he really meant all day, but until you approach him and tell him what you heard and what you felt, and ask for clarification, none of us are ever going to know, you know. And if it was me, I would be carrying around this pain until I knew, until I got some clarity, and I would have taken it the same way you're taking it. I can't hear that statement and not take it any other way. That's just me.
Right.
Whether it was meant that way or not, we don't know.
Absolutely.
We have several more questions, but we're out of time. This one went fast today. This was a really good topic.
Yeah, this is fun.
And we were like pretty much on topic the whole hour.
It really was.
Cool. So save your questions, bring them back to us in 2 weeks. Matt and I will be here. And thank you for joining us. Anything you want to say to take us out, Matt?
Honestly, if there was something I was gonna throw out, first of all, you guys, great job for coming here and showing up, asking really vulnerable, really beautiful questions. Whether you struggle with an addiction or you're a partner of somebody who does, or a family member, right? The fact that you're showing up here, you're in the fight, you're trying to figure out, you have wounds as well, whatever's going on, and I'm proud of you for being active to try and heal all of those wounds, and empathy with each other, and finding people who can be empathy with us is really how connection occurs. And so keep at it. You're gonna get it. And it's a tough journey, but keep trying. Don't give up. And that's what I got.
That's good. It's good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Like I said, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thank you, Matt, for your time.
Yeah.
See you in a couple of weeks. So have a good weekend, everybody.
All right, bye.